Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to Ask NK. Blender 2.91 has now been officially released, and for sure there are tons of cool features and updates that is now available with this tool. And today we're going to take a look at some of the amazing cool features and also do a simple walkthrough for most of them. Now if you want to get started with this, you can simply go over to the link in the description, download Blender 2.91 right now, and with that said, let's get right into it. So with Blender 2.91 open, you would see that it's basically the same. There is no huge difference for the UI, but there are certain things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, for the UI, they're going for a much more monochromatic look for most of the things that they're doing. So if you click on this Blender icon right here and go over to About Blender, you would now see that this is a much more monochromatic stuff. Now, next thing which you would also notice for the UI is right here, you would also see that we have a very tiny search property. Now with this search property, you can search for things. So what do I mean by that? If you simply click right there and hit the word sample, you would easily find where sample, or where the word sample or where the parameters that deals with sample exist within your properties section. Now if you're also looking for something like color, you would find this here. Now this is very useful because most people would want to find these parameters, and instead of scrolling all the way from one parameter tab to another, or maybe from one property tab to another, they can now easily see where these things are, and they can just simply shuffle through to get exactly what they're looking for. We also have some updates right here within the outliner. So for the outliner, you can click and create as many collections as you want. So I'm just going to make that and click and drag this right into that, and we have a different collection, and you can right click and change the colors of the collection. Now changing the color of the collection is cool, but there are also cooler things that you can now do. Something else which is also very interesting that you can do is if you go over to the modifier tab and click and choose to add something as simple as a subdivision, you can also transfer your modifiers. You can simply click on this modifier right here and connect these, or reorder these or transfer these to the next cube. Something else which is also cool is that these modifiers are independent, so in case you throw in a simple wireframe, that wireframe exists here, and you can also transfer that wireframe right here, and once you start making changes to just this particular wireframe, it's only on that wireframe, so it doesn't affect the other one at all. So to me, I think this is very cool, and it would help people work even way better. And speaking about things that would also help people work better, within the UI there's also a very tiny update that you're going to find here, and this has to do with the animation timeline. So if you click on the button right here, there is an add-on replace, and now we also have the only active set, we have the layer recording, and we also have the cycle aware recording. Now this will be very useful for most persons that are trying to do animation, as in most cases you might want to simply do some layered recording and also some cycle aware keying instead of going over to your dope sheet and going over to your NLA and doing these things. Now while we're looking at this, there is also an implementation to the fuzzy search. So the fuzzy search got its first implementation coming, and this one is very nice because at any point in time you can now search for things and easily find these things without actually hopping across. So in most cases, let's say we're looking for something that has to do with the wireframe deformer, instead of typing the wireframe, and most times you might not really remember to type the exact words, I can actually type this reverse, and of course I can also find that here. So in terms of fuzzy searching and prefix matching, this actually works. So speaking about things that actually works, there is now a very cool update that has to do with the categorizing of menus. Now this one is very nice. Right now you can see that the menus are well categorized, so in case you're searching for stuff, you can know where scripts are, you know where data is, you also know where generals and animation is. And something that most people may want to see that is presently not available is the add object. So the add object has been taken out due to the fact that there is actually some updates that's coming to this. So right now you will also not be able to have the add object here, and this is now proposed for Blender 2.92. And before we move on to talking about other stuff, let's also take a look at something that I almost forgot. So let's say we make a copy of this object right here, and if you press tab on your keyboard, you can now notice that we have this here. So this now tells you the state that your object is. So if you like to have multiple objects in that same state, you can also hold down control, click right there, and you can have multiple objects in the editing, or in your components mode stage, or in your edit mode state, and you can actually go in there, or you can dive in there and start making some edits. So depending on what you like to make or what you want to do, you can do this, and this works across everything. So something else which is also very cool is if I simply make a brand new collection right now, let me also drag that collection right down there, and let's do that coloring, and also click on this one and also do a simple coloring, and I choose to move this down, you would also notice that because this collection is what we have, or because we have these things in this collection, you would notice that we also have a tiny line here, contrary to what we have in previous version of Blender, which is Blender 2.9, where if you just press your tab key, you don't necessarily see what's going on there, and you can't really tell. This is also something very, very impressive. And right now we're looking at modeling. So within the modeling session right now, there is also some very interesting updates, and the updates which we're looking at, the very first one, which is calling out to everyone, is Boolean. So now there is an update to the Boolean. So if I simply select the Boolean right now, and actually I think it's best to create that collection that we did the first time, so I'm also going to drop this one right here and make sure that we have that right over there. Okay, so now with this, you can now simply Boolean across objects. So I have this object here, I can now select the object and select the cube, and we can do some very beautiful Boolean. Now the idea for this Boolean is to handle overlapping geometries very well, and also deal with coplanar faces. So presently there is actually no issue in terms of inserting things. Like right now I can insert these things. There's actually no issue with inserting things, and you can also notice that I'm Boolean from one collection to another. Okay, so you can see that right here, I'm Boolean from one connection to another, and I can change the operation however I would like. Now something else which is also interesting that you can also do is you can have multiple sets of objects stored up in different places and in different collections, and you can also Boolean collections. So for what we have here, I can choose to create another collection. So let's just quickly do that, and also enjoy the fact that we can change this color, and maybe I should change this other one as well. And then I can pick up this cube, drag this cube and drop it right here. If you would like to add modifiers to this, of course you can. So I can hit Ctrl and 3 on the keyboard to add modifier right there, which is a subdivision, and let's just simply apply that. So if I go back to the cube which I have here, I can now click on the operand type and change this to collection, click right here and select collection number 3. So once I do that, of course you can see that we have this going, and at any point in time you like to move things across, yes you can, and you can also select this and also move this across. So the only thing that you have to deal with in most cases when you have random stuff is just the speed. Despite that, this works perfectly fine, and you can use this both for objects and at the same time for collections. So let's talk about the UV. So for the UV, once you switch over to the UV, you can now do something called overlay. So right now the UV supports overlay, and you can choose to overlay the UVs directly onto whatever texture that you're working on. So just in case you're working on a texture, you can do that. If you'd like to also display stretching, you can also do that, and this is pretty nice. Now while we are looking at things that are also very nice, it's actually worth it to go back and show you guys some things that has to do with what you can get with some modifiers. And the modifier I'm actually talking about specifically is the ocean modifier. So the ocean modifier now has a brand new update. So if I simply click right here and turn on wireframe just to preview this, we can now set our viewport resolution and then set our render resolution. So you can set your render resolution all the way to, let's say, 14, and then you can set your viewport resolution down to something like this. This would help you so much. So just in case you are trying to get the best out of it and you don't want to throttle your PC performance, you can now use this in a much more cleaner and easier way. And while we're looking at things that you can use and work in a cleaner and easier way, we also have some updates to the bevel. Now we've talked about this bevel thing before, and it's very interesting to see that right now, if you go ahead and add a simple curve, so let's just go in there and add a curve like so, you can now easily click right here and simply go all the way down to where you have geometry, and within your geometry you can now simply choose to fill caps just in case you want to have that filled, and then you can set this as object, and also you can do that of profile. Now once you do the profile, you can now increase the depth of your object. This is one. You can fill caps if you like, and then you can increase the resolution in case you want. So let's see what this looks like with wireframe turned on. All right, you can also play with face orientation if this is also something you're going for, but most of all, you can now use this and also distort just a simple curve, and you can easily create amazing things out of this. So this one is very useful, and there's a couple of samples presets that you have here that you may want to look at. So you're just simply working with a curve, and right now once you press your tab key and select any point within your curve right now, you can simply tap G and move this around, and you are simply manipulating this with a curve. Here's a very simple sample of what your curve bevel profile can actually help you do, and this is not only for your curves, as this is also applicable to text as well. So depending on what you want to create at the end of the day, you would also find this one very, very useful. So with this said, let's also take a look at something else, because right now we are diving into a very cool terrain called sculpting. So the sculpting feature right here in Blender is getting crazy. So Pablo has been doing a lot of things, and one of the cool things that we have, and I guess a lot of people or a lot of you guys might have seen this, is a multi-res. There is a lot of features. So one of them is that if you have multiple objects right now, you can work with these multiple objects on a per mesh symmetrical level. What do I mean by this? All right, so let's actually go back and let me explain. So let's say we get Suzanne, the monkey, and I'm just going to push her here, and then we can subdivide her about 3 like so. So we have multiple sculpting objects here, right? So if I choose to do her sculpting, or if I choose to work with Suzanne from the Z-axis, and right now you can see we have this at Z-axis, and you can see that happening. If I switch for some reason and switch over to start sculpting right here, I can be sculpting in the X-axis, and Blender would remember that this is for the X-axis. So contrary to what you had before, where maybe if you're sculpting in X-axis and you switch over to another object, you now get to start sculpting in X-axis on that place. Right now you can switch back and forth, and you can now sculpt on per mesh symmetrical level. Now with that there is also a very cool update to fading interactive geometry. Now how this one works is also very, very interesting. So let's say, for example, you have multiple objects you're working on. Like right now, let's say I'm working on the monkey and I don't want to get distracted by the cube, which I have here. You can now simply fade this off. So how you can fade this off is as simple as going over to the overlays, and then you can now fade off your interactive geometry. So you can bring this in, push that out. Depending on what you want to get, you can do that. If you want to turn on wireframe, of course you can as well. Now, while we're looking at things that you can fade in and fade out, there is also a HDR lock rotation feature that is now here. So let's say we go over to our viewport shading. Now, within your viewport shading right now, one of the things you would notice is if you click on this button right here, we have rotation and we have the lock button here. So this is your lighting setting lock. So you can click, and let's say we switch over to something like this. If you want to see this, you can increase that so you can see it. And at this point, you can now also rotate it. Now, what happens is when you're sculpting and you're rotating, you notice your viewport rotates alongside with the model. But if you don't want that to happen, you can click on this button and click right here, and that is going to be static. So once you start rotating, you now have that visual feedback, and you also notice that your viewport is static. So this one is also very, very useful for those that find the viewport rotation a bit distracting, and you can now turn this off and then get into sculpting. So with this here as well, there's just a whole lot of things that Pablo has been working on. I mean, an entire video should be dedicated for this, and that's why we're going to speed ramp a lot of them. So one of the things that you need to also see right here is that if we jump back, Pablo has also implemented something called line gestures, and the line gestures has to do with trimming, projecting, and also masking. Of course, there's a lot of other things that you can do with it. So for example, let's actually start with one. Yeah, so if you actually click on this right now and go over to the line mask, you can click that, and if you click and drag, you can mask based off the line. So how it works is very, very easy. If you click, you'll notice we have a gradient area, and that area is where the operation is going to be performed. So you can do that, and then you can also click and also do this like so. So depending on what you want to do, this is actually very useful. And for that of the trimming, there is a box trim and also a lasso. So for the box trim, this is basically what you get, all right? And this in its rank, it's more like cutting the object and then creating a brand new polygroup, or a FACEIT as it's called here in Blender. So you can do that. And if you're also looking for lasso trim, of course you can also use the lasso trim to also trim some parts out. So depending on what you're trying to create, you can also use this. And this doesn't just end there, because you can also use that for creating FACEIT. So we saw FACEIT, and FACEIT is pretty cool. And if you're also feeling excited, you can make FACEITs this way, and then you can also use the lasso tool to also make FACEITs like this. The same is applicable for the line project, and these are some very cool updates that is available for the sculpting gestures in terms of line projection. Now all of these things, they still have their basic properties, and we've covered some extensive videos about them, so you can simply take a look at the description and see some of our weekly updates and see these things fully in action. Some of the other cool features is the cloth brush. So the cloth brush and filter now supports collision and scene colliders, so you can now collide things across, just in case you you want to collide or you want to simply make good clothes. Now the cloth brush also supports soft body and plasticity, as this is also part of the properties that are now baked into it. And of course you can increase this and reduce this depending on what you're trying to make. And how you can get this active is by simply coming over to your brush section, click on the cloth brush, scroll all the way down, and you notice right here we have the soft body plasticity. You can increase that, turn on collision, and this is also going to work. Now if you just want to work with just this, you can get that happening. If you want to have colliders happening, you can also get this one happening. And while we're talking about things that you can get happening with the cloth brush now also supports dynamic area simulation. So for that, you also need to go over to the simulation area and convert this to dynamic, and then you can change various things from here. Here's a very simple example that Pablo has also made for the dynamic area. So this is also very good, and this one reminds me so much of a brand new feature that folks at ZBrush are announcing, which has to do with thick skin. And of course you can see the comparison between both of them, and they kind of look alike. The only difference here is that Pablo's own seems to not stay just within the mesh, because you can actually do this and do it outside the mesh, but regardless they are almost the same. So let's take a look at the boundary brush. So the boundary brush now has a brand new updates to it. So for the boundary brush, by default what you do is when you go over to your brushes, you select the boundary brush. You can now use your boundary brush to do things like this. So just in case you're trying to make some fold, yes you can actually use this to make some very cool folds. But then Pablo, he likes adding a lot of cool features. So this time he also changed and added some stuff. So he added the cloth simulation to this one right now, so you can also use this. So in case you want to make cloth simulations, all right, so you can see that. And if this is not good enough for you, then maybe you might want to try out the twist, you might want to try out the smooth, you might want to try out the, depending on what you want. So let's actually grab that twist right here, and then we can do this twist, and this is going to be very cool for a lot of people. And then if you're also thinking, maybe I would like to get a loop, yep, you can actually get a couple of loops, and you can do that as well. And this one is very nice. And maybe you want to do some inflating, you can also use this and inflate this. And you can see how easy it is right now to just go in there and start making stuff. Let's go back and switch this and make the smooth object come back to this, and there you have it. So with the boundary brush, you can do a lot of cool stuff, owing to the fact that even with the boundary brush as it is, as a simple object as it is right now, you can also play with the geometry. And for the geometry, you can also choose to do a couple of other things like grabbing. So you can also choose to grab objects and move them around. And if you're also feeling excited about doing some smoothing stuff, yes, you can also use the boundary brush to smooth some parts of your model as well. So you can see with these tools that are made available right now, there's just a whole lot of things that you can do. And while we're speaking about things that you can do with the tools here, Pablo has also added a multi-resolution displacement eraser. And this one is also very cool. So just in case you're working with multi-resolution modifier and you like to erase certain parts, of course you can now easily do that. There is also a sharpen mesh filter, which is now there. And actually speaking about the sharpen mesh filter, let's take a look at some of the filters that are now here. So if you scroll all the way down and you go over to your filters, and by the way, this is your cloth filter for those who probably don't know. So you have your cloth filter here, and you can use this to actually do a lot of things. All right, so you can use this to initiate gravity, and let's say if we press F on the keyboard and let's bring this down and press M on the keyboard to make some masking here. So just in case you haven't seen this, this is crazy. So you can do these ones as well. So we can actually go back here, click, and then we can do a full inflate. So you click and drag and you can inflate your object like so. So very crazy stuff right now you can do with this. Let's actually take this out and then talk about the mesh filter. So if you click on the mesh filter, there are some updates to this one that you may want to look at. The mesh filter now has a couple of things. You can enhance details if this is what you want. Just simply click and drag and you can enhance details. And if you like to sharpen the details, you can also do that. You can sharpen details as well. If you want to relax some face sets, if you also like to make some changes like erase displacement, you want to make some randomization, you can also do all of that stuff. And speaking about things that you can do within the same sculpting section, which is a lot, is you can now easily invert your smooth to actually get some much more enhanced stuff. What this will do is it's going to get you a much more sharp and crispy looking model. So right now you can use this to actually add and maybe make some parts pretty sharp. All right, so just in case this is a thing for you, you might actually want to take a look at. With the brand new version of Blender 2.91, you can now do this. You can now, throw in an empty right now, and you can go over to that empty, which is a volume empty, click right here, and you can now easily make your meshes become volumes. So if I click and select this cube, and right now it is as easy as that. You can now make your volumes from meshes. Regardless of what mesh you have, you can now convert them to volumes. If I select this mesh right now and I choose to make a subdivision, and let's just simply add that, you notice our volume actually conforms to that. If you also choose to animate this, your volume also conforms to that. So this makes sense, all right? So just in case you are thinking about making volumes, you can now easily make volumes directly in Blender by simply using static objects and also animated object. So we've taken a look at this before, and if you want to see that, link is also going to be in the description. Something else which is also very crazy about this is the fact that you can make volumes is not just crazy enough. They also implemented something that has to do with displacement. So you can also displace your volumes. So let's actually crank things up and switch these over to cycles, because we would like to see these things in action. And let's just get rid of this cube. All right, so if we select this object and go back to where we have our modifiers, you can actually do some very crazy things. And for this, you will need to drive this with a given texture. So for this texture, instead of going in and clicking new to make textures, I can just click on this button right here and make a new texture from here, and then I would apply a texture that has already been existing in Blender. So for this one, I was just going to click right here and simply use clouds, for example, and with this I can play with the size, and you can see it's distorting the mesh directly, or it's distorting volume, and I can play with the depth, and depending on what I would like to achieve, play with the nabla, and I can start getting some very clean and lovely looking stuff from this. So depending on what you like to do, you can actually use this and start making stuff. And at the same time, if you're also feeling excited about modeling, yes you can. So you can also turn this off, and once you go right in here and press your tab key and you start modeling with this object, so let's tap Z and actually look at the wireframe. So if you select this and you start modeling with it, you can also get your volume to actually look like so. So I'm also going to press tab on the keyboard to jump out, select this object and jump right back here, and then you can see this. So this is lovely. So you can now do a lot of cool things with these things right here. And while we're looking at things that are cool that you can do with it, you can also get a volume. You can import a volume. You can you can make a volume right here, and then you can do even something way more crazy. So let's say for here I would actually bring in a UV sphere, and with this UV sphere right now I would like to convert this volume to become a mesh. So how you can do that is by simply clicking, and then you can go all the way down, and once you have this, you can see that we have volume to mesh. Select that, and then you can select the volume object, and automatically you can have that as a mesh. So at this point, if you also want to convert this to become a mesh that you can use, if you like to shade this mesh, you want to do some crazy things with it, right now you have all of the advantage and you can do that. So I can click on apply right now, have this object, and then I can select the sphere. Let's hide this one right now, select this, and I can move this to wherever I would like it to be. So you can see I had this, and then we made that, and then we converted it to this. So it is just very interesting to see that you can convert objects to volumes and volumes back to object, and at the same time you can distort those volumes regardless of what and how you made them. So now, speaking about things that you can work with regardless of how you made them, let's get another brand new scene. And now what we want to do is to talk about the snappier F curves that is now here. So if I simply click and drag all the way up, and let's actually make an animation, turn on your keyframe, and for this I'm just going to tap I on the keyboard and make that location right there, and then I'm also going to move this over to a frame like 40. Let's also set this one to 40 because we would like to get a loop, and then I will move this one right over to a point like so. So right now if I press the playback button, you notice we have an animation going on there. So if you click right here, which is the timeline, if you click here and switch this over to your graph editor, you can now create snappier animations. Now this is actually something that wasn't really available before, but now you can now click and then you can drag to create snappier animations, especially if you are into working with F curves. So this one would actually help you a lot. I can also click right here and also push this all the way to a point like so. So with this now I can get the perfect S curve that I want, and then if I press the playback button, you can now see we can get something as cool as this. Previously in Blender 2.90 and in previous versions of Blender, this was actually something that you couldn't really work with. Now something else which is also very interesting is at any point you try to add a keyframe. So let's say at this point I would like to raise this all the way up and add a keyframe, you would notice that it doesn't distort the S curve. So this is also a very good improvement. In previous versions of Blender you will get a distortion, and this might actually affect the way the animation would run through. There's also some very cool features that has to do with the keyframing, and there's also some very nice updates with the NLE. So if you want to read more about that, you can also go over to the release page where you can see more of that. Now let's talk about something else that actually deals without modeling and is something for free. Now the folks at Blender Foundation have also updated the Blender kit. So just in case you have no idea, the Blender kit is actually an add-on kit that you can now use. So if you simply go over to add-on and simply type the word KIT, actually you get the Blender kit, and if you click on this button, this is an asset library that exists directly in Blender. So we've talked about this one over and over again, and with this asset library, if you simply press N on the keyboard, you can search for a lot of things. Of course, we've also talked about Sketchfab before, but let's continue with this one. So for this, if you are looking for models, you can simply click on models and click on free, and you can get free models here. So for any of the free models that you want, let's say you want the extinguisher, you can just click there, and the beautiful thing is this automatically loads directly within your scene. Now this one is very nice. They've also updated how this actually looks, and for the material as well, they've also included a couple of materials. They've added a complex ball material that you can use to preview and also see specific material types in terms of edge wear, cavity details, translucency, and also SSS. Right here you can see we have that. You can also notice we have this right here, and then we also have this one right here. So depending on what you want, you can just simply click and you can get that loaded directly into your scene. Now if you also want to preview this, you can just simply go over to your preview section for EEVEE in this case, and you would also notice that this is going to load, and you can see that. If your materials are downloading, you would also notice that the material loads in this way, and that way once it is done loading, you now have access to it. You can also have access to not just materials, you can have access to brushes. So just in case you're looking for brushes that you want to use for sculpting, you can see we have a couple of brushes here, and with these brushes you can actually start using them to apply some cool stuff and also some cool things to your model. And real quick before we go, there is a couple of updates for the grease pencil, and we've talked about these ones like the UI updates that has to do with boundary fill. We've also talked about setting operators, which has to do with the new cleanup frame operator that is also there. And for those who like to trace images, we've also talked about the fact that you can now bring in your black and white images and you can trace them, but there is actually something that you cannot trace. You can trace colored images, and if you also like to trace things like your SVGs, you can also choose to trace these things. Something else which seems to be coming to 2.92 is the fact that you can also trace sequences. For sure, this one will be very lovely, and a lot of people will find this one very appealing, as it's going to save them time of redrawing certain poses and certain frames over and over. And of course, with that said, there are certain updates to image editor, there's updates to the motion tracking shaders. Cycles also has some settings and also some updates. We've looked at this one before, which has to do with motion blur for Alembic files, so we've seen that, there's a video for that. And we've also talked about the fact that Cycles now supports Ampere cards, which are the RTX 3000 series cards. So if you'd like to see more about this and want to read more about some of the bug fixes and some of the pop-up menus, that is also available for the collection manager and some other things that we are simply looking at right now, you can also go over to the release note and see some of these things for yourself. There is no update for the key mesh yet, and there is also no update to the asset manager at this point. We also got to see that the add object tool has also been removed, and hopefully that would also come back in Blender 2.92. So this is more like it. Tell me what you guys think about this in the comment section, and of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.